Just a week into President Donald Trump's second term in office, we're now seeing some of the legal challenges start against him as well. Now look, right now as they stand, a federal judge has blocked Trump's executive order ending birthright citizenship. And on this note, the promised deportations of illegal immigrants, well, they're now starting. Reports are coming in of ICE agents carrying out arrests in Boston and other parts of the U.S., and meanwhile, a new wave of investigations are now starting into the incidents that took place on January 6, 2021. Only this time, the investigations are not focused on Trump, but on those in the government who may have been involved in lowering security at the Capitol, covering up information from the public, and other things like that. I'll be going into these topics and more today, so let's jump into it. Now look, folks, first off, again, we're 1 week into the Trump administration. Part 2, legal challenges are now emerging against some of his policies. We see challenges against Doge with Elon Musk. We've seen different states try to push back against some other policies, and now we're seeing a federal lawsuit. Now look, among the 200 executive actions he came prepared with, right, he was ready to run, was an order to bring an end to birthright citizenship. And that order was met with lawsuits from 22 states and maybe counting. And now a federal judge has temporarily blocked Trump's order. And on that note too, some illegal immigrants are now trying to get C-sections to very rapidly give birth so their kids can become citizens before the law changes. But AP said this. It says a federal judge on Thursday temporarily blocked President Donald Trump's executive order denying U.S. citizenship to the children of parents living in the country illegally, calling it blatantly unconstitutional during the first hearing in a multi-state effort challenging the order. It notes the 14th Amendment to the Constitution promises citizenship to those born on U.S. soil, a measure ratified in 1868 to ensure citizenship for former slaves after the Civil War. But in an effort to curb unlawful immigration, Trump issued the executive order just after being sworn in for his second term on Monday, and the order would deny citizenship to those born after February 19th whose parents are in the country illegally. It also forbids U.S. agencies from issuing any document or accepting any state document recognizing citizenship for such children. It also notes the Trump order, it drew immediate legal challenges across the country, with at least 5 lawsuits being brought by 22 states and a number of immigrant rights groups. It notes a lawsuit brought by Washington, Arizona, Oregon, and Illinois was the first to get a hearing. And the Department of Justice later said in a statement it will vigorously defend the president's executive order, which it said correctly interprets the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Now look, this lawsuit was expected. Of all the things he did, this was the one that was most likely to get challenged immediately. Now, we saw similar challenges to Trump during his first term in office, even when Biden was president. You know, we saw some states challenge his orders as well. But what this lawsuit will do, the one now being brought up against, well, can Trump actually ban illegal immigrants from getting access to birthright citizenship? Well, it's going to challenge the legality of it on a very key point. And that challenge will very likely eventually head to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the irony with that is, well, an executive order could come and go. Had they left it as such, had Trump to sign an executive order, whoever comes into office next could sign it away, just like Trump signed away 78 Biden orders on day one of his administration. But if this goes to the Supreme Court, and Trump actually does have a pretty favorable standing there, well, the Supreme Court can make it very hard to change. This could actually change the law of the United States. Now, look, as many have mentioned, there is a Supreme Court precedent that is used to defend birthright citizenship for non-U.S. citizens. But there's also a strong case on Trump's side of it, and basically this is what it is. The Supreme Court precedent, the one they used from the late 1800s, that had to do with children born to U.S. permanent residents, not to illegal immigrants. There's the question now of whether this applies to illegal immigrants or tourists or people visiting on work or a student visa or anything like that. It's likely this is going to be the question the Supreme Court will use to eventually determine the answer. And look, on the other side of this, people abuse the birthright citizenship law on a massive degree. Now look, there's not too much data on it. We can only go by older numbers. But in 2007, Pew Research found that about 6% of all births in the entire United States were from illegal immigrants. 6%. In 2007, about 9% of all births in the United States were to illegal immigrants. Sorry, date's wrong here. But look, keep in mind also that the last few years have seen massive spikes in illegal immigration. We've seen the numbers go up to 7 million, 10 million, who knows, with the migrant caravans and everything else and relatively open border policies. Meaning, if we were seeing a good chunk of the American birth rate being illegal, children of illegal immigrants, and all of them are given citizenship, well, what does that mean when you flood the country with multiple times more than we had prior to that? Well, that's going to be the big issue this is going to run into. Now, on that note, and in other news, the promised deportations are now starting. Now, there were mixed reports on where they were going to start. Some were suggesting Chicago would be the first stop for all these deportations. Border Czar Tom Homan clarified that when he was asked. He said they're going to happen all over the country, not just in one place or two places. And we've now seen reports of ICE agents carrying out arrests in Boston. Let me show you this. NBC Boston. There's growing concerns over potential ICE raids locally after federal agents were spotted by NBC Boston cameras entering homes in East Boston Wednesday and taking people into custody. It notes these operations come amid heightened alert for mass roundups and deportations promised by President Donald Trump. But federal authorities would not confirm they are related to that effort. The Trump administration announced Tuesday it would allow federal immigration agencies to make arrests at so-called sensitive areas such as schools, churches, and hospitals, ending a policy that had been in effect since 2011. In a statement, the Department of Homeland Security said, quote, criminals will no longer be able to hide in America's schools and churches to avoid arrest, which was happening quite a bit because that changed again under Obama. Now, look, of course, Boston is a focus right now, mainly just because there's footage going around. NBC had cameras there. But in reality, there are actually a lot of reports like this. It's not centralized in one area. Actually, in an update from yesterday on their enforcement efforts, ICE said they made 538 arrests and they detained 373 people. Now, not a lot if you understand the entire numbers of mass illegal immigration, but for a couple days working on this, that's pretty significant. And look, New York will also be one of the places they're going to be taking these kinds of actions as well. ABC7 said this. It said in New York, ICE agents arrested an alleged El Salvadorian MS-13 gang member, a Jamaican citizen who had been arrested for sexual exploitation of a minor, and a Honduran citizen with a drunk driving conviction. It notes, there were similar scenes in Boston, Denver, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Seattle, Miami, and Washington, D.C. A Justice Department memo threatened criminal charges also against state and local officials who don't cooperate with ICE. But New York Attorney General Letitia James, the one who is, again, involved in some of the cases against Trump, says the Trump administration cannot force local law enforcement to help them detain and deport immigrants, meaning illegal aliens. Now remember, even though New York is still technically a sanctuary city, they still have that in place, right, or state, the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, he has said that he will cooperate with the Trump administration on these deportations. And Mayor Adams has been fairly critical, actually, of the mass migration policies, the impact they've had on the city, the amount of money it costs the city to house them and feed them and put them up in fancy hotels. He also stated his belief that criminal charges that he's currently facing are a result of retaliation against him because he dared to challenge the mass migration policies. And look, on the point of the deportations we're now starting to see, get ready to see a lot more like these. The first stage of the deportation plan, at least in terms of what we've been told, right, because we may not be hearing everything right now, is they will begin with criminal aliens. Step one, all the illegal immigrants who committed additional crimes while they were here in the United States, those will be the first. And Trump will likely have some extra clearance on those types of deportations as well, because the Senate They just approved the Laken-Riley Act. Remember, it already passed the House, and that allows the deportations of criminal aliens, and that bill will now head to Trump's desk to be signed into law, meaning that Trump will not just be acting on an executive order for these deportations. When states say you don't have the authority to do it, he can say, well, yeah, I do. This is the legislation, and that's aside again from just standing law. Deportations of this type will be pretty solid, and again, that will be related to deportations of criminal aliens. Now look, the next challenge is going to be, after just going after regular illegal immigrants, whether he will do that and what's going to happen again with countries that will not take them back. And while Trump has suggested that he plans on deporting, well, basically all illegal immigrants, in fact, his administration is saying that if you have entered the country illegally, you can expect a visit from ICE. It's not clear how broad that's actually going to be or what the process will be. If the number we understand just under the Biden administration was 7 million, 10 million, some say much higher than that. And if we understand that even prior to that, the number of illegal immigrants was 10 million, some put it even as high as 30 million or even more. We don't actually know the full numbers. That's a lot of people. And the ability of them to deport all of them, well, we'll see if they can carry it out. We will see what goes on with this. They have said that they will. They have said at the very least people will be receiving visits from ICE. And look, on January 22nd, Trump did sign an executive order, and that says that it suspends the physical entry of aliens engaged in an invasion of the United States through the southern border. Trump has declared an invasion on the United States. In other words, right, also the border is now being closed and secured, and they have an order now to massively, just rapidly deport people when they cross illegally. But here's another part of that order. Have a look at this. This is the White House. It says direction to immediately repel, repatriate, and remove illegal aliens involved in an invasion. It says through the exercise of his authority under the Immigration and Nationality Act and the Constitution of the United States, President Trump is authorizing and directing the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, and the Department of State to take all necessary action to immediately repel, repatriate, and remove illegal aliens across the southern border of the United States. And notes also, through the exercise of his authority, President Trump has further restricted access to the provisions of the immigration laws that would enable any illegal alien involved in an invasion across the southern border of the United States to remain in the United States, such as asylum, meaning that entire process they were using to stay here under kind of a gray area legal ground, where they were coming here and just applying for asylum en masse. They can't do that anymore. Trump officially brought that to an end. Now, we'll again have to see how broad this is. Reports are now saying that Trump is increasing the number of U.S. troops being sent to the southern border. The original number is about 1,500. The new number is about 10,000. But it does seem the first two stages are to, again, deport criminal aliens and to stop mass illegal entry to the United States. Now, look, in other news, though, a new wave of investigations are now starting into the incidents that took place on January 6, 2021. The protests or raid of the Capitol building, however you choose to look at it. Only this time, well, we might get a clear picture of what really took place. Was it an invasion? Was it an attempt to overthrow democracy? Was it a peaceful protest where people stayed within the velvet ropes? Well, look, the investigation that is now starting is going to determine that. And this investigation seems a lot less focused on Trump and his alleged involvement, and instead on the various agencies, the government officials, and the others who may have been involved in lowering the security at the Capitol building, of covering up information from being seen by the public, including, for example, refusing to grant exculpatory evidence to trial lawyers when they were defending their clients, and also possible wrongdoing in the way that some of the investigations were handled. The Federalist said this. It said, a new select subcommittee by Representative Barry Loudermilk, Republican from Georgia, will be established under the Judiciary Committee to continue the work of the previous Congress, according to multiple sources familiar with the plan. And it's Loudermilk led the previous effort as chair of the House Administration Oversight Subcommittee. And look, before leaving office, you might remember what happened. Former President Joe Biden pardoned members of the Democrat-led House committee to investigate January 6th. He gave them a very broad kind of pre-pardon in case they get charged with something. And he also pardoned many of the witnesses who testified to them about what took place on January 6th. And this was in light of Republicans recommending criminal charges against some of those individuals, such as, for example, former Representative Liz Cheney. They did recommend charges against her. There were many accusations against the way the previous committee handled the investigations. There were allegations of false testimony, people lying under oath, people altering evidence, people destroying evidence, and other problems like that. And we will very likely now see all this dragged into the sunlight. Now, look, while they're now shielded from federal prosecution, though, these individuals pardoned by Biden, the nation still wants answers on what actually took place on January 6th. And look, given the narratives were also used to frame many of the criminal charges against Trump and his associates and his supporters, well, finding the truth of what really took place is going to be even more important because their reputations, their names, their records, it's all tied to the real investigations and finding out, well, what happened. If there actually were crimes committed on the other side, then it's possible some individuals who are not pardoned by Biden could still face criminal charges. And even the people who were pardoned, they could still face potentially civil lawsuits. And you have about 1,500 people who may be interested in filing lawsuits, depending on how this goes. Now look, folks, in other news, the big corporate news networks, they have not been faring so well since Trump was announced as the winner of the 2024 elections. I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break. We'll be back in less than 1 minute, so don't go anywhere.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. The big corporate news outlets, well, they have not been faring so well since Trump was announced the winner of the 2024 election. And right now, folks, well, CNN, they just announced layoffs of about 200 people. Comcast, it's breaking off its cable networks, including MSNBC, CNBC, and others, into a separate company, keeping their downward trend away from its shares. And now a bias complaint against NBC, ABC, and CBS has been restored. New York Post said this. It said, new FCC chair Brendan Carr reversed a last-minute decision by the Biden administration-led regulators to reject bias complaints lodged by Donald Trump against 3 network TV news broadcasters, the agency said Wednesday. And notes Brendan Carr. He moved the complaints against ABC, NBC, and CBS, which accused them of being partial to Democrat Kamala Harris in their coverage of the presidential campaign, back to a pending status, according to the Federal Communications Commission website. It notes that one complaint said ABC News favored Harris during its coverage of the presidential debate by aggressively fact-checking Trump during his face-off against Harris. Another claimed CBS was guilty of news distortion for airing edited answers from Harris's interview on 60 Minutes. The third complaint slammed NBC over Harris's appearance on Saturday Night Live in a sketch with Maya Rudolph just 3 days before the election. Now look, basically here's how it goes. If you're on cable, there are certain requirements in place for you to keep that spot. You can't do things in an unbalanced way, especially during election season. The FCC, well, they can review those cases, and you might face fines, you might face lawsuits like they're facing with Trump right now. You might face other issues, possibly even losing your spot. For example, look, parts of the complaint against NBC is that it violated the equal time rule that requires networks to give equal time to all presidential candidates during a major election. Trump is alleging they failed to do that. And Trump also has a $10 billion lawsuit against CBS on similar grounds, under the allegation that the network selectively edited an interview with then Democrat presidential candidate Kamala Harris to make her look more eloquent. Now, look, on this note, across the board right now, we're seeing a pretty big shakeup of the news industry. Some of them might not make it, folks. Even on the print side, in fact, the Washington Post, one example of this, they recently laid off about 4% of their staff. And they're also going through some pretty rough times, as are many. But it also seems, well, the worst could still be to come against many of these big corporate news networks, especially given the fact Trump recently signed an executive order to restore free speech and to end federal censorship. Now, you might say, well, federal censorship, what does that have to do with these networks? Well, it includes the so-called censorship cartel, and that involves all organizations that were involved in censorship. If you're a cartel, it means you're working in cahoots with other people. And a lot of those news networks are working in cahoots with the federal government on censorship. That includes many news outlets involved in censoring, demonetizing, deplatforming their business competitors. And what do you call that? Well, you call that a violation of the law. Now, they could face, for example, antitrust lawsuits, and there's very likely a lot more to come. We could see these news networks need to compete equally on the same footing with other media at the very least. That's going to be interesting. Because what happens if all these big corporate news outlets lose the ability of playing on an uneven battlefield? Well, they're suddenly going to be forced to compete with people who are probably doing a lot better than they are. Then on top of that, Trump has also been discussing the possibility of changing the way the White House press briefings are managed. Independent media could get more standing. They're even talking about giving a spot to Joe Rogan, for example. And legacy media could get less access. And look, if some of these struggling big corporate news outlets suddenly lose their access on top of everything else they're facing, well, that could be seeing some rough times ahead, because here's how it's going to look. A lot of them only maintain their relevance because they have access other people do not. We have to quote them because they get information other people do not get, because again, they have the access to these agencies, access to individuals, access to the press clubs, and they have the ability, because of their roles within the agencies, to keep their competitors out of that, which they do. Now look, on this note too, we will see what happens with it. All of this is currently in motion. Now look, in other news, folks, we recently reported that pro-life activists who've been charged or even imprisoned in some cases under the Biden administration because they were protesting outside abortion clinics, they were asking Trump for pardons on this, and that is now coming through. Daily Wire said this. It said, President Donald Trump will pardon pro-life activists imprisoned by the Biden Justice Department within days, the Daily Wire has learned. In fact, about 20 people or over 20 people. And notes the plight of the imprisoned pro-lifers is an immediate priority to Trump's team, and they will likely be pardoned within days. Two sources with knowledge of the matter shared with the Daily Wire. The revelation comes a day ahead of the 52nd Annual March for Life, a massive, peaceful demonstration that takes place in Washington, D.C. to bring awareness to the many babies whose lives are ended through abortions. The president is expected to appear at the rally in a pre-recorded video. Now it says those defendants were imprisoned over protests at abortion facilities in Tennessee, Washington, D.C., and New York. The D.C. protest involved a group of pro-life protesters singing songs, praying, locking arms in front of the facility's staff entrance, and attaching themselves with ropes and chains to block the doors inside the infamous Surgery Clinic in October of 2020, a late-term abortion facility. And it's in Tennessee, a group of pro-life Christians gathered in a hall outside the Carafem Health Center in Mount Juliet, where they sang hymns, prayed, and urged women to not get abortions in March of 2021. And also notes that many of the defendants have already been imprisoned for over a year, with many more months yet to serve. Now look, the request for their pardons, this alleges that the charges against the pro-life activists, they were not consistent with how similar cases were handled on the other side of the political aisle. Now look, basically here's what was happening. Pro-life clinics were facing threats. Some were firebombed, there were protesters outside of them, but for some reason, we only saw criminal charges on the other side of this. We only saw criminal charges for people protesting at the abortion clinics, not the birth clinics. And it seems now that Trump is going to take action on this. He's been talking about it. Now, in the United States, of course, this ties in with the FACE Act. You cannot legally block entrances to abortion facilities or churches or things like that. You do risk getting arrested for that. But because of the, again, perception of unequal use of justice, they could get pardons. And look, this also ties in with one of the campaign promises from Trump and something he put into effect on his first day into office. Donald Trump signed an executive order to end the weaponization of government. And that includes orders for full investigations throughout the government and even throughout the intelligence community over everything that was done over the last 4 years under the Biden administration. And they're going to be searching for any and all examples of politicized justice and then begin remedying the wrongdoings that may have taken place. And that's going to be significant, of course, as we learn, well, what is actually happening in this country. Was there weaponization of justice? Were people being politically targeted because of their views or their religion? We will soon find out. Now, folks, hit the like button, leave a comment. Let's jump into some questions. All right, let's see here. And a lot going on, too. I don't know if you saw, Trump also, he just signed to have released the reports, the government documents on the assassination of JFK Jr. And also the assassination of Martin Luther King. And then asked the person standing next to him to give the pen that he signed that with to RFK Jr., Trump's HHS pick, again, who is related to JFK. Let's see here. M. McKinney, you're saying same song and dance at the state level. When we lived in California, the people would overwhelmingly vote for something and judges would overturn your vote. Yeah, you know, it's one of the issues in the U.S. In the United States, the way that law used to be is not necessarily how it is right now. The way, for example, that judges can block, the will of the people very easily. I mean, you could argue the powers were always in place, but the politicized use of it is a relatively new thing. And, you could argue as well that, George Washington himself tried stopping the rise of political parties. There's a little more to it than that. But there is the perception that when people become more loyal to a party than to the Constitution or the idea that, they represent the people of their state or their district or whatever else, it changes allegiances. And the issue we have now in this country is that I know judges are not supposed to be political, but a lot of them are, right? And really, a lot of them are. And which party they align with deeply, deeply affects how they're going to determine the law, what they do in terms of blocking, blocking laws, or blocking what the people want, or blocking the president of the United States. And, there's also kind of a chess game when it comes to politics. A lot of things are very strategic. Not everything is as simple as it is on the surface. Sometimes there's intentional blocking. Sometimes people even file lawsuits in collaboration with, for example, a political party, with the intent of basically bringing a lawsuit, losing the lawsuit, and then establishing court precedents, basically. Or, for example, bombing a case, not bombing, but I mean intentionally failing a case, so that you can't get what they call double jeopardy, right? That an individual cannot be charged for the same crime twice. And so they can bring a case, intentionally lose the case, and make it so the individual or the group can never face criminal charges for that in the future. There's a lot of really dirty stuff like this that, some strategists do in this country. I don't know how widespread that is, but it does happen. Remember actually in 2020, some of the election laws were changed using those methods. You had activist groups who were bringing cases and basically just losing the cases in order to get the courts to rule on them. And the courts were establishing different rules to change the election rules using that process. That was one of the big things that happened in 2020 when it came to the changing of the election laws. TZ Burton, you're saying, can we just eliminate all benefits for illegals? So legally, they should not be eligible for it. In fact, I remember debating this with a friend like years ago, and he was like, you know, what you're saying is not true because illegal immigrants are not eligible for welfare or social benefits or anything like that. And, you know, since they're not eligible for any of these things, they don't put any additional weight on the system when they're here. And that was one of the big arguments. My counter to that is, well, technically, right? If you go by the actual word of the law, that is how it is. But that's not what's being done in practice. Because what's being done in practice has been this. A lot of illegal immigrants have methods of getting around that. One of the big ones was a change that happened very heavily under the Biden administration, where the Biden administration began granting parole to these individuals. And as soon as you apply for asylum, and they have people who educate them on how to game the asylum system, they all apply for asylum. That gives them pseudo-legal status. They don't have to remain in Mexico. They remain in the United States. The asylum courts are so gummed up, it's going to take 7 to 10 years to hear any of them. And then they give them parole. As soon as they're given parole, they become eligible under a kind of a gray area legal zone. They become eligible for social welfare and every program you can possibly imagine. They get more benefits than even U.S. citizens who might go on welfare for the most part. And then you have the issue that if they have a baby, while they're here, the baby becomes a citizen, they can then collect welfare on the child, even if they are illegal immigrants. Some people say, well, that's not illegal immigrants, that's an American citizen. But, it's part of the game that's played, right? They get money on it. And if they have 4, 5, 6 kids, they get money for all of those. And then, of course, there's the weight on the school system, the weight on the hospital system. Many illegal immigrants, for example, they can walk into a hospital, get relatively free health care. They're not on the books. There's no way to know who they are. And they can just choose to not pay. And that is a very big problem that's put a lot of weight on the hospital system, to the extent that some hospitals in the United States are going out of business. And then Americans and insurance companies have to eat the costs of that to make up for the losses to the hospital, which means we pay more for it. Then there's the problem with the school systems, which again, you could argue, well, these are American citizens if they have kids here or their children. What are you going to do? Like not let a kid go to school? Fine. But the problem you have is that schools are already overcrowded. And if you have 30 kids to a classroom, and in addition to that, you have to have English as a second language, and you have to accommodate not just English and Spanish, but like 100 different languages. There's people from all over. You're talking like 100 different languages in some cases. Then you're looking at a very difficult challenge of how you spend your school budget. And so kids are losing opportunities. They're getting rid of extracurricular activities. They're getting rid of sports programs. They're getting rid of all the different assets that they would normally be using to teach your kids in order to accommodate all this, mass illegal immigration. And so, there are people saying, you should just rapidly deport them to prevent the need for social benefits. Because, this is the problem you have when you don't enforce the law immediately. If you have someone illegally enter the United States and you let them stay, what then happens? Well, you have to accommodate all these other issues. And you could argue you can't let people starve to death or freeze on the streets, and you can't let kids not go to school. The other argument is, well, you should rapidly deport them so that this entire array of issues does not come up in the first place. And if you were properly enforcing the law, none of this would exist. That's the other side of the argument. And on that note, too, I did see in New Jersey, there are local officials claiming that the rights of illegal immigrants are being violated when they're being deported. And this is suggesting that illegal immigrants have U.S. rights under our system. So again, it's an issue caused by the very fact that they've been allowed to stay in violation of the law and not deported. Let's see, Paul Groves, you're saying, and also in the UK, We have criminals just walking around free when somebody who pastes on social media something the government feels affects anyone, they are jailed. Yeah, I've been seeing that. The UK is turning into a circus. I don't even know what to make of it. You have like full-on rape gangs there, and people even talking about it risk going to jail. How is that even a thing? How is that even possible? And people are saying, well, it's racial discrimination if you talk about the rape gangs because many of them are from a certain part of Pakistan. I was actually having a conversation with one of my friends in the UK. My friend is from Pakistan originally. And he was making the point that the individuals involved in those gangs, they come from like one particular place in Pakistan. I don't know the details of it. But to that point, not all the Pakistanis, most of them do not support that. It's a segment of them involved with that, and like a criminal segment of them. It does not reflect all the individuals. But the problem you have when it comes to enforcement is this. If you have a government trying to shield a criminal element by connecting that criminal element to an entire group of people, you are creating the perception that entire group of people is tied in with it. It is a problem of the very way that they're protecting the criminals. Look, if you, for example, have an issue with gangs raping underage girls 1,000 times, and I believe most people would have an issue with that, yeah, you're mad about it, right? You say, well, let's investigate. And they say, no, we can't investigate because they're part of this entire group. And if you criticize this one individual, you're criticizing this entire group. What are you going to do to that society? You're going to make people connect that one individual to that entire group. It is a horrible way to do it. And again, it goes back to the issue we're facing, that if you allow the protection of a criminal or of a certain individual and allow them to stay and even commit crimes, and then try to say the reason you can't do anything about it is because of race, you're going to create racism. You are going to create false perceptions in society where people discriminate against an entire group of people because you're defending that individual through the identity of an entire group of people. It's a horrible way to do things, in my opinion. I think that very action is creating the very problem that they claim is the base of all this. I think it's a self-created problem through the way they've done this. And again, it's wild stuff in the UK, to the point where I have seen people even reporting on it or getting thrown in prison. It's wild, actually. We'll see if anything changes with that. Maybe some pressure from Trump. I don't know if he can do anything about the UK, but it is pretty wild stuff. Realitysreal.com, you're saying, make health insurance great again. Yeah, wouldn't that be a thing, right? I was having a conversation with my dad about this because, folks, have any of you looked at the rates for Obamacare? The Affordable Care Act, right? It costs a lot of money. And, people have pointed out that you could say that the Affordable Care Act, for the people who are in the upper echelon of society, a lot of them still pay a lot of money. I know they get kind of kicked around a lot. But, a lot of them can afford it, even though I don't think it's fair to make them do that. And then a lot of poor people who couldn't afford health insurance in the first place, they benefit from it, right? But it's the people in the middle, the majority in the middle, who suffer the most. Because for a lot of people in the middle, whereas before, if you wanted Blue Cross and Blue Shield, very good health care, you know what that looked like? Well, the way that looked is you maybe paid, I don't know, like $40 a month, sometimes for a whole family, $100 a month. It wasn't that much money. Now, if you're getting Obamacare, you're looking to pay like hundreds or sometimes even thousands for it. I've heard some crazy estimates on how much money people have to pay into it. And a lot of people can't afford it. It's like paying an extra rent for a house, and you don't have a choice. Now, remember Trump removed the mandate where on your tax forms they asked if you bought it or not, and you'd get fined if you didn't. Trump got rid of that. But the idea of being punished for not having health care as well because you can't afford it in the first place, that was crazy. I remember myself, I was having trouble with that. Through work in New York, you get it these days, but it's different these days. But yeah, it's not affordable at all. Now, Trump is talking about re-examining healthcare. And, I want to mention real briefly, too, some people say, well, the wealthy can afford it. A lot of wealthy people are in debt. A lot of this is actually kind of a weird element to wealth. A lot of lawyers, a lot of people who have pretty good jobs, many of them don't really pay off their college debt, not until like way later. And a lot of them, you could argue they make a lot of money, but they tend to spend a lot of money. Their lifestyles tend to eat up a lot of wealth. And so just because somebody has a lot of wealth doesn't mean they're actually wealthy. You know what I mean? And so you put on another $4,000 charge or whatever with them, it does affect them. It does affect them as well. And I know that there's been this kind of anti-wealth culture that's developed in the U.S. over maybe since the Obama administration. But I also don't think it's really fair to a lot of people. I know people who technically make a lot of money on the books, but really struggle financially. Even though on the books it looks like they shouldn't be. Let's see here. Gina Mikulik, you're saying the healthcare system does not profit off of our good health. Why keep funding and buying into it without demanding it be fixed? Yeah, and that's my argument too. I don't think you should. I think that if you are forced to pay into a mismanaged or broken system, you will not fix the problems that exist in that system. You fix it by allowing it to fail, right? This is the American way, folks. Hear me out. If you want something to get fixed, you don't bail it out. Or maybe, at some point, maybe you can help it. But you have to help it reform. You don't subsidize it. If you just throw money at a problem, you're just going to be subsidizing the problem. If you move in and swoop in and just start pouring more money on top of something that's broken, the things that were destroying it, the things that are causing it to break down, will not be fixed. You will merely give them the ability to maintain the things that do not work. And, if you do that, I don't think you're doing any good for anybody. In fact, I think you're actually harming people in that case. I'd say with the healthcare industry, that's a very clear example of what's wrong with it. This is why I do not support socialized medicine. In fact, I don't know if there was a video going around in Canada of people waiting in line to go and register for a new doctor, because who wants to be a doctor when you have to go to the school for so long, there's no money in it, right? Who wants to be a doctor? Who wants to be a specialist, for that matter? Because you have specialized doctors for, just about every type of surgery and stuff. Why would you do it if there's no money in it? Why would you go to school for, 10 years or longer when there's no money in it? There's no incentive. There's no reason for it. Why would you do it? They don't. And so what you have is a very limited supply of something that everybody thinks they get for free, but it doesn't work that way. And then when you call up and say, hey, can I get that surgery I've been in line for 2 years? And they might say, well, have you considered assisted suicide because you're just a weight on the system? You're like, well, gee, thanks. I see where this has gone, right? I think the end road of a lot of those systems do not work. And I believe that if you want to have something work, it needs to be based on more traditional economics. I think that does come not through increased regulation, but I think in this front, at least through deregulation. I believe that actually there are a lot of frontier medicines that work pretty dang well. And there are a lot of even traditional medicines that work really well, that can address issues. And I would argue that a lot of modern medicine, although it has its uses, you break a bone or whatever else, fine, right? But I would say that a lot of it does not actually address the real issues. And some would argue that's part of the business of medicine. They don't want to address that. I'll give you an example, actually. Okay, my dad's been married a few times now, right? My dad's second wife, his father-in-law had back problems, really bad back problems. The guy was a fisherman, right? He was a lobster fisherman. He did monk fishing, kind of old, crusty fisherman, New Jersey, right? And he had really bad back problems. He had 2 surgeries. He had to get laid up in bed for weeks at a time, right? Just horrible. Nothing fixed it. In pain all the time. Walking hurt him. He was handicapped. My dad urged him to go to a chiropractor, not to, this type of, not the surgery system, right? My dad had a friend who was a Gonstead chiropractor, which I went to Gonstead chiropractors growing up too. I like them personally. They're a little more gentle. They actually check and see where there's things misaligned. And it's really fine-tuned adjustments, right? Gonstead chiropractor. My dad urged him to go to a chiropractor. He's like, nothing's going to fix it. He said he had fused vertebra. Again, he had surgery twice, constant pain, nothing worked. Finally, my dad convinces him to go. And his wife, and his father-in-law's wife, so his mother-in-law, was a nurse, and she was like, "Don't go to a quack. Those guys are quacks," trying to talk him out of it. Finally, he goes. He goes in, gets adjusted, and that same day, he walks out of that clinic, and the pain he had is gone. Just like that. Now, I'm not saying this works for everybody, but it worked for him. And he actually started crying when he came out. He's like, all these years I was suffering, and the remedy was right in front of my face this whole time. It was so easy. He was able to walk fine after that. His back problems, I don't know if they went away totally, but at the very least, he wasn't in constant pain. He wasn't laid up in a bed all the time, and he wasn't getting surgeries. I would argue that there are different forms of medicine that are very effective. And the other issue too is that sometimes, because of the insurance, doctors are regarded as primary care, but sometimes they also designate chiropractor or physical therapy also as primary care. And so a lot of doctors, they just won't recommend it. And that's also one of the issues you have come up. I've actually seen a lot of stories like this. Guys who are veterans and stuff who have just constant pain, and they go to a chiropractor or something like that, and it fixes the pain, which is, again, outside the normal track of medicine, right? Not recommending medical stuff here, but I'm saying personal experience. I've seen this stuff, right? All right, folks, let's see. Judy Akeem, you're saying, do political parties make sense anymore still? Many times it's a source of bias for politicians to march in lockstep. Other times it gives voters the wrong idea about what a certain politician will do because of their party affiliation. Yeah, I've thought about that too. There are different countries that handle their elections in different ways based around the party system. Now, if you were to ask me, I think it'd be fantastic if you could have no party affiliation. I am actually registered as a no party affiliation. I'm not with Republicans or Democrats in terms of my official voter registration. Non-politically affiliated, right? I think that'd be better. The problem you have is that policy-wise, in America, a lot of political policy is actually very heavily rooted in religious belief. A lot of Christians are very conservative. I think that started changing a lot with, these days it's different, of course, but I think that started changing a lot with libertarian movements, with the Tea Party, and I would actually argue that Trump was more of a phenomenon that arose from the Tea Party, right? Kind of a going back to the Constitution type movement. And I would actually argue that I've talked about it before, so I won't go all into it, but I would say the political parties these days have changed. I think the current Republican Party is more like the Tea Party than it is the Bush-era Republican Party. And the Democrat Party has kind of become a combination of the old Democrat Party and the old Republican Party in some ways. They kind of merged that together as well. Right, so you kind of have the Constitution Party and the new, I don't know, a libertarian / I don't even know what it is, Trump Party, and then you have kind of the establishment party, and that's the kind of the difference we have now. In some countries, they have it set up where smaller political parties can get more of a voice. For example, when I was in Taiwan, I watched how the elections were done there. And they have processes in place to make sure that a fair amount of weight is given to representation from smaller parties that would normally not be able to have any representation because of the way they do their elections. I know in Canada, you don't even elect your prime minister, right? In Canada, you don't even elect it. You actually vote for a party. You vote for parties, and the party basically appoints people. I know that, I believe in Australia, they have a party-based election system where you just vote for parties, and they have it so that as the election goes, they have different ways of weighing it so that individual parties have more weight. I think in America, America, in comparison to other countries with a democratic republic system, right? A democracy, right? In comparison with other countries that have a similar political system, America is actually more on the individual than on parties. Because we actually do give less weight to parties than most other countries with systems of elections do. But I would, and then also you have individuals who vote against their parties, maybe more Republicans used to be, but now Democrats. And so they're not as locked into it as it may sound initially. But I do think there are problems with the party system that could be reformed. In particular, when it comes to fundraising, I do have issues with that personally because it incentivizes them to raise money. And if they raise money, they have to get money from people who want something in return. And you could argue, hey, well, representative democracy, you got to represent somebody. But I do think that introduces some problems for them. Ashley from California, you're saying, illegal benefits aside, why do members of Congress get lifetime health benefits? Most jobs end your coverage when you leave. You can thank the unions for that. There are arguments about pensions, and it's not just government workers. A lot of government contracts, including to, like in New York, for example, subway workers or people who work on construction in the big buildings. A lot of these individuals who get government contracts also get pensions in a very similar way to government employees. And the problem you have in New York, and I'd say in the government overall, is when you start having a lot of people who no longer work and who get those pensions, a lot of the budget has to go to them. New York City, for example, they have a really tough problem with the budget because of the debates over the pensions. The pensions really drain the city. And I mean, you can argue, well, what do you mean? You're not going to take care of people when they retire? I mean, it is a tough issue, right? How do you weigh that? For a lot of us, like my dad, for example, self-employed his whole life, it's a different story. For a lot of Americans, you got to kind of save up and you got to just, make sure you can afford health insurance going forward, and you got to pay it yourself. There are a lot of people who deal with that too. And, it is the case. There are certain jobs that have very good benefits, and they will pay your benefits, to the end of your life after you retire. And some of them let you retire pretty early too. You don't have to stay on that long with some of them. But also even some big businesses have really good benefits. You can work for some of the big supermarket chains even, and they'll have very good benefits. So, it goes case by case. But I do think we are nearing a point in our country where we need to probably re-examine how we spend our money, because I would argue, as I believe many would, that the current track we're on with spending is not sustainable. We can't go deeper into debt, I don't think. Martin McKenzie, you're saying, given the 14th Amendment, you're talking about birthright citizenship, right? Given the 14th Amendment, the solution to birthright citizenship is legal, regular, and limited immigration policy, strictly enforced, so we don't have pregnant illegal aliens creating anchor babies. Yeah, I'd agree with you. It's kind of like a problem that has only emerged because the law is not being enforced. You would not have the problem of anchor babies, at least not with illegal immigrants. You would still have it with people here with green cards. You'd still have it with people who are here on student visas or work visas. You would still have it with tourists to an extent, although there's some gray area with that too. You have a lot of people from Mexico who will just illegally cross the border, give birth in an American hospital, make the American people eat the hospital bill, go back to Mexico, the kid's an American citizen, and then they can collect benefits in the future with it. You know what I mean? There are ways that people game the system just by visiting like that or by entering illegally. But I think the mass problem we have, the real serious problem where even like a big chunk of the births in America are to illegal alien children, I think that when you make the problem too big, then it becomes something that you really have to address. And I do believe that the problem would be fixed just through normal enforcement of the law. As I was discussing earlier, when you don't enforce the law and you allow a problem to persist, then you have to deal with the problems that emerge from that problem as well. But rather than trying to regulate the problems from the problems, you should go back to the source and look at the main issue, which is Martin McKenzie notes in this case, is the fact that we just let people come here and illegally immigrate and we don't deport them, right? We're not enforcing our own laws. All right, folks, let's see here. All right, I guess we'll end it here. Folks, happy Friday. I hope you all enjoy your weekend. I'll see you again Monday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Also, tune in tonight. We have our new show, which is Prime Time. It's me, Roman Balmakov, Tiffany Meyer, Chris Bob, and Cindy Druk here. It's an NTD show. Of course, Roman and I, we kind of go between both, but we're on there. Tune in tonight. You can watch that. Let me know what you think about it. Any feedback, just let us know. It's still a new show. We're still fine-tuning it. It'll get better over time, you know what I mean? But I think it's pretty good as is. Let me know what you think. I'm curious what your thoughts are. That'll be airing tonight, so be sure to tune in. That said, folks, again, like this video, share it with somebody, tell a friend or family member about Crossroads, and thank you so much for being here. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.